Si yo soy presidente del Real Madrid, Luis Figo será jugador del Real Madrid.
It is impossible to overstate the absurdity of the words you just heard. To hear a would-be president of Real Madrid state openly for the world to hear that were he to assume the reins at the Bernabeu, his first act would be to take the star player of their most bitter and hated rivals. It is akin to an executive of Manchester United stating out loud his ambition to prize Steven Gerrard away from Liverpool, a thought so ridiculous, so unthinkable, so unpalatable that it would turn the stomachs of Liverpool fans the world over. It simply would not be allowed to happen. And that was the feeling among the Barcelona fans who worshipped Luis Figo as a god. Surely this man, who they had welcomed into their hearts, would not throw their adulation back in their faces to don the colors of the team they despised above all others. Surely this was just another empty promise made by just another man with political ambitions. Surely this was just a carrot being dangled to the Real Madrid faithful, the people whose votes Florentino Perez needed to assume the presidency of their beloved club. Barcelona fans didn't believe it, but Real Madrid's fans did, and the unthinkable duly happened. Florentino Perez, the underdog in the presidential campaign, shocked the world by unseating the incumbent Lorenzo Sanz to become one of the most powerful men in the world of football, and he delivered on his promise to complete what remains the most stunning and controversial transfer in the history of the game. Madrid fans were ecstatic. Barcelona fans were dismayed. Their talisman, their hero, the man they had embraced as one of their own, had upped sticks to cross the divide to represent the antithesis of everything they stood for. Luis Figo's transfer to Real Madrid is a tale characterized by the opposing forces of loyalty and betrayal, of honesty and deceit, of love and hate. But like all gripping tales, if we scratch beneath the surface, we find there is more than meets the eye. Beneath the emotions, we find that this was not just a transfer. It was a beautifully sophisticated game of chess, a battle of wits and strategic brilliance. It was the tale of two revered clubs being maneuvered by one man to satisfy his thirst for power and influence. A man who would go on to rule at the Bernabeu for the best part of 2 decades, using his strategic acumen, infectious charisma, and ruthless cunning to establish a legacy that would become the envy of fans across the globe. This is a story of power, politics, and strategy, a story of a chess grandmaster and his quest to reach the top. This is the story of Luis Figo's move to Real Madrid, the most shocking and controversial transfer in the history of football. For a generation of football fans, Real Madrid represent the very pinnacle of the beautiful game, a name synonymous with power, prestige, and glory. Over the last 25 years, Los Blancos have lifted the Champions League on 8 separate occasions and have been crowned the champions of Europe 15 times, twice as many as AC Milan, who sit in second. It is a trophy around which their identity has been forged, an obsession for fans, players, and presidents alike. This illustrious history, this story of preeminence, this unique legacy, provides a pull for players around the world that no other club can match. A shiver runs down the spine of fans who read stories of Real Madrid taking an interest in their star players. Because when Real Madrid come knocking, the player in question usually opens the door. But it wasn't always this way. While Los Blancos dominated the tournament in its early days, winning the first 5 titles contested, their dominance of Europe would not last. Another title came in 1966. However, the club would not lift the trophy again for another 32 years. Something inconceivable when we think of the Real Madrid of today. And that 32-year wait was ended under the stewardship of this man. Lorenzo Sanz, like all presidents who had gone before him, had only one objective in mind when he assumed the reins at the Bernabeu: to bring the Champions League back to its rightful home. to end the 3-decade-long thirst the club had endured as rivals from England, Italy and Portugal shared the trophy between them. Born in Madrid in 1943, Sans's love affair with football and the then European Cup began when he saw Madrid defeat Fiorentina to lift the trophy in a match that was played at the Bernabeu. The son of an amateur boxer, Sans enjoyed a brief career as a goalkeeper for a local third division side, but would ultimately make his name and his fortune in the world of business, first in printing, before expanding into real estate and construction. In 1985, he would join the board of Real Madrid, which at the time was under the stewardship of this man. Ramon Mendoza was the 13th president of Real Madrid, and his early years were filled with great achievements, including a record 5 consecutive league titles. However, like all presidents of this storied club, there is only one measure of success, being crowned the Kings of Europe. And this is something Mendoza failed to do. In 1995, he was forced to step down from his role after it was revealed that he had overseen a period of financial mismanagement which left the club deeply in the red. With Madrid decapitated and rudderless, Lorenzo Sanz was anointed the new president and set to work building a team that would scratch the itch that had afflicted the club for decades. Sanz was a big, bold and fiery personality, an imposing figure with a love for Cuban cigars and a man not afraid to ruffle a few feathers to get what he wanted. In his first year at the helm, he prized Roberto Carlos away from Inter Milan, as well as bringing in Clarence Seedorf and Croatian striker Davor Suker, and he appointed Fabio Capello to lead his new team to the promised land of European glory. Capello was one of the most brilliant managers in the game at that time and had already lifted the Champions League with AC Milan 2 years previously. While the Italian guided Los Blancos back to the summit of Spanish football, the Champions League eluded them once more. Sanz and Capello, both combustible characters at the best of times, brought their relationship to an end after one season, with Capello returning to Milan. His position was filled by the German Jupp Heynckes, and it would prove to be a masterstroke from Sanz. While Madrid's form in their domestic league was inconsistent, Heynckes' team shone in Europe and secured a place in the final against the mighty Juventus, a team who would be making their 3rd consecutive appearance in the final of Europe's showpiece competition. In a tight and cagey game in Amsterdam, the match was settled by a Predrag Mijatovic strike in the 66th minute. When the referee blew the final whistle, it unleashed a tidal wave of ecstasy for the players, fans, and everyone associated with the club. The victory in Amsterdam was a moment of redemption, a return to the pinnacle of European football, a reaffirmation of Real Madrid's identity and heritage. It was a celebration of their storied past, a confirmation of their present prowess, and a foundation for future triumphs. 2 years later, they would slay Spanish rivals Valencia in Paris to lift the trophy for an 8th time, validating their resurgence as the premier force in European football. These triumphs placed the players in the pantheon of Real Madrid greats, etching their names in the club's folklore. And joining them would be Lorenzo Sanz, the man who had steered this mighty juggernaut of a club back to what their fans believed was their rightful place. And in doing so, he had ascended to an untouchable position. Or so he thought. Success in the business world is undeniably respected and admired, often characterized by financial acumen, strategic vision, and leadership prowess. Captains of industry are celebrated for building empires, steering companies through turbulent markets, and generating immense wealth. And yet, for many of Spain's most successful and powerful entrepreneurs, respect and admiration are not enough. These individuals, having conquered the corporate ladder and amassed significant wealth, often find themselves yearning for something deeper and more visceral. They need love, they crave fame, and they long for the euphoric high that comes from an adoring crowd chanting their name. Business leaders who have reached the apex of their careers find themselves drawn to arenas where their achievements can be celebrated with a fervor that spreadsheets and balance sheets can never evoke. And there is no more perfect arena to provide this than the world of football, and there is no more prestigious role than that of president of Real Madrid. While donning the white shirt of this illustrious club represents the pinnacle for many players, for any ambitious individual with a thirst for power and a vision for greatness, leading Real Madrid offers a unique opportunity. The presidency of Los Blancos has always been viewed as the crown jewel for many of Spain's most ambitious and successful men. So while Lorenzo Sanz's impressive 5-year stint would have seemed to have placed him in an insurmountable position ahead of the club's presidential election in the year 2000, that wasn't going to stop another of Spain's most brilliant and ruthless businessmen from trying to depose him. Florentino Perez is not a man who lacks self-confidence. Born in Madrid in 1947, Perez studied to be a civil engineer, honing the skills of precision, strategy, and large-scale planning that would serve as a foundation for his much greater ambitions. After dabbling in the world of local politics, Perez extended his reach into the realm of business, becoming the chairman of one of Spain's largest construction companies and acquiring a fortune along the way. His name became synonymous with success, a man with a reputation for taking over struggling institutions and turning them around through strategic brilliance and expert administration. In short, Perez was not a man accustomed to failure. That was until 1994. While his success in the business world had earned him many admirers, his appetite for prestige and influence was insatiable, and his love for Real Madrid was undying. So in the 1994 presidential elections, Perez challenged the incumbent Ramon Mendoza, whose own re-election was far from certain given the club's financial woes at the time, coupled with the fact that he had not returned the club to its rightful place as the kings of Europe. In what was a tight contest, Perez leveraged the skills acquired in the worlds of business and politics to lead a campaign that would leave him agonizingly close to achieving his dream of assuming the presidency. Mendoza defeated Perez by a margin of 700 votes in a contest that was marred by allegations of corruption. Defeat and loss, while often seen as setbacks, are integral experiences for those who rise to the pinnacle of success. For the very best, these moments of failure are not endpoints, but rather critical junctures that fuel growth and resilience. The ability to learn from defeat, to analyze what went wrong, and to adapt accordingly distinguishes champions from mere participants. And as history would go on to prove, Florentino Perez is every inch a champion. So Perez returned to the world of business, while Mendoza would later be deposed when the extent of the club's debts were revealed to the public, allowing Lorenzo Sanz to usurp him. The 1994 defeat was a chastening experience for a man not used to losing, but as the most effective leaders do, he used these insights to refine his policies and strategy, emerging from the experience with a stronger, more resonant vision, a vision that would blindside his opponents on and off the field. Lorenzo Sanz reasonably believed that securing the club's first Champions League for 32 years and following it with another 2 years later had earned him enough credit with the club's fans to secure another term as president of the club. And were he up against any other candidate, that may have been the case. Sadly for him, he was up against Florentino Perez, a man who had spent 6 years working in the shadows, honing and perfecting a plan that was so brilliant, so clever, so audacious that it would checkmate Lorenzo Sanz, the Real Madrid fans, and above all, their most hated and bitter rivals. Summer in Madrid can be a stifling affair. Temperatures can easily surpass 100 degrees, driving many of the city's natives to evacuate the capital to spend the summer days on the beaches that line Spain's beautiful coastline. But the summer of 2000 saw the thermometer reach unprecedented levels. As the sun beamed down with no clouds to oppose it, the sweltering heat which bathed Madrid was amplified by the increasingly fierce battle for control of the city's most prestigious institution. The Madrid natives, who would normally abandon the capital's sweltering streets, waited with bated breath to see who would emerge victorious in the heavyweight battle between the champion Lorenzo Sanz and the challenger Florentino Perez. The tale of the tape made Sanz the overwhelming favorite, ending the club's 32-year wait for a Champions League and following it with another 2 years later, appeared to give the... His punches were powerful and precise, each one backed by tangible success and the unwavering support of fans and players alike. Unlike Sanz, Perez didn't have the weight of past glories to lend power to his punches. Indeed, his only foray into the world of football club management had ended in defeat 5 years earlier, when he was knocked out by Ramon Mendoza. But what Perez lacked in experience, he made up for in strategy and cunning. He was the nimble fighter, able to bob and weave, throwing sharp jabs at his opponent and targeting his glass chin with clever, incisive punches. As the fight commenced, Sanz came out all guns blazing, throwing bombs at Perez delivered with his reminders of past victories and promises of continued success. Perez danced around the ring with a keen sense of timing, evading the heavy blows the champion threw at him, while Perez landed strong jabs on the champion's chin with reminders of his financial mismanagement. They failed to draw blood, and the battle-hardened Sanz was ahead on points on all of the judges' scorecards. Round after round, the battle raged on. Sanz landed punch after punch, each one a testament to his proven track record. The fans roared with every hit, their loyalty and confidence in him seemingly unshakable. But Perez, undeterred by the champion's heavy blows, continued to move with agility. He spoke of transformation, of a future where Real Madrid would not just compete, but dominate the global stage. His promises were ambitious, his strategy meticulous. As the fight wore on, Sanz's heavy blows began to take their toll. Then, in a masterstroke of strategy, Perez delivered his decisive punch, the blow that rocked the champion on his heels and swung the momentum in his favor. In a move that stunned both his opponent and the raucous crowd, Perez promised to sign Luis Figo, the superstar from arch-rivals Barcelona. It was a punch that landed squarely, shaking the very foundation of Sanz's campaign. The sheer audacity of the promise, the possibility of Figo wearing the white of Real Madrid, was a dazzling prospect that left the fans breathless. The arena was electrified. The cheers for Sanz's powerful punches began to waver as the fans were captivated by the brilliance of Perez's vision. The nimble challenger had outmaneuvered the champion, his promise of signing Figo acting as the decisive knockout punch. On election day, the crowd's chants had changed. Perez, the underdog with quick feet and a strategic mind, had landed the winning blow. It cannot be overstated just how seismic and controversial a promise this was. Figo was widely regarded as the best player in the world at that time, was odds-on favorite to win the Ballon d'Or, and, crucially, was the jewel in Barcelona's crown. Players had moved between the two clubs before, but none of the caliber of Luis Figo, and to most observers, it seemed like a deal that would be nigh on impossible to pull off. The financial aspect of the deal was not the major stumbling block. Figo, like all players plying their trade in Spain, had a mandatory release clause inserted into his contract, meaning Barcelona would be powerless to stop him leaving were it to be activated. The issue was that the heated rivalry between the two clubs was based on more than just football. The bitterness between the two institutions is a story rooted in a complex web of historical, cultural, and political factors. So Florentino Perez needed to convince Luis Figo not just to betray his teammates and the supporters who worshipped him. He needed Figo to betray more than a club. The question is, how did he do it? A daughter's wedding day stands as one of the proudest days in a father's life, a poignant culmination of years spent nurturing, guiding, and cherishing his beloved child. While Lorenzo Sanz had enjoyed many successes during his life, there was no accomplishment he was more proud of than his 5 children. Sanz had 3 sons and 2 daughters, and on the 6th of July 2000, his eldest daughter Malula was to marry one of his employees, Real Madrid fullback Michel Salgado. As the vows were exchanged and the celebrations began in earnest, the festivities were disturbed by news that would ultimately spell the end of his time in charge at the Bernabeu. For it was on this day the news broke that his rival Florentino Perez had signed a contract with Luis Figo, which would see the Portuguese winger move to the Bernabeu in the event that Perez won the election. It was the summer of Euro 2000, and Luis Figo was at the peak of his powers. As Barcelona's captain, he was an icon at the Camp Nou, revered by fans and highly respected by his peers. With complete disregard for all of this, Perez later announced that the rumor was indeed true, that if the fans elected him, Figo would desert Barcelona to don the white of Madrid. Lorenzo Sanz dismissed the story of the secret deal, sarcastically claiming that Perez would probably announce the club had agreed to sign supermodel Claudia Schiffer as well. But on the 16th of July 2000, Florentino Perez was announced as the new president of Los Blancos, and 8 days later, he delivered on his promise to bring Luis Figo to the club. Player transfers can be relatively straightforward affairs, with the major stumbling blocks being the price to be paid to the selling club and the salary to be paid to the player in question. But Figo's transfer to Real Madrid was anything but straightforward. Indeed, what normally represents the main sticking point in transfers did not apply in this case, as Figo had a release clause, meaning Barcelona were powerless to stand in his way. And with Real Madrid's commercial prowess, there was little doubt that they could offer him a salary that would satisfy his requirements. What made this transfer so difficult was the wider context in which it sat. Real Madrid versus Barcelona is widely regarded as the biggest rivalry in world football. While the hatred between Liverpool and Manchester United runs deep, and Rangers and Celtic's rivalry is among the most bitter in the game, the hatred that exists between Spain's two most illustrious clubs is unmatched. To understand why, we must turn through the pages of history to one of the most tumultuous chapters in the story of the Spanish nation. Francisco Franco is a man who, to this day, casts a considerable shadow over his country. While it is beyond the scope of our story to explore his life in detail, we cannot discuss the bitterness that underpins El Clásico without exploring his role in creating it. In 1936, Spain was in the grip of political turmoil. A leftist coalition had secured power that same year, and Franco, a known authoritarian rightist, plotted with other figures on the right of the country's political spectrum to launch a coup that would unseat the elected coalition. This marked the beginning of the Spanish Civil War, a conflict that ran for 3 years and one that would leave deep scars across the country. Franco's victory in 1939 marked the beginning of a dictatorship that sought to centralize power and suppress regional identities, especially targeting Catalonia, the heartland of FC Barcelona. Under Franco's regime, expressions of Catalan culture and language were heavily repressed. In this oppressive climate, FC Barcelona became more than just a football club. It emerged as a symbol of Catalan resistance and pride. The club's motto, Més que un club, encapsulated its role as a bastion of Catalan identity and a silent yet powerful form of protest against Franco's authoritarian rule. Real Madrid, on the other hand, came to be associated with the establishment and the centralizing policies of the Franco regime. Although the club itself was not directly a tool of the dictatorship, Franco's government favored Real Madrid as a means of promoting Spanish nationalism. At least, that is the narrative from those associated with FC Barcelona. Franco's football club allegiances are heavily disputed by both sides, with Real Madrid fans pointing out that Barcelona won 8 league titles during Franco's reign, and he saved the club from bankruptcy on 3 separate occasions. Where the lies end and truth begins is almost impossible to decipher. However, for many fans, Barcelona represent the oppressed and Madrid the oppressor. And it was this burden of history that would weigh heavily on the shoulders of Luis Figo and would represent a huge obstacle for Florentino Perez to negotiate. But we must remind ourselves that Florentino Perez trained as a civil engineer, a profession based upon strategy and expert planning. So rather than bet on Figo finding the emotional strength to make the move, he engineered a plan that would leave Figo with no choice but to sign, and the Real Madrid fans with no choice but to vote for him. As stated previously, a rumor had circulated that Figo had signed a pre-contract with Perez, which stated that the Portuguese would sign for Los Blancos in the event that Perez emerged victorious. Figo denied the claims, of course, claiming that he would not be so stupid as to do such a thing. The problem was, the rumor was true. It was no secret that Figo was angling for a pay rise at Barcelona, one that would reflect his status as the world's most gifted footballer. But Barcelona were in the midst of their own elections, and it was widely known that their own finances were far from healthy. This standoff between club and player gave Perez an opening, and he moved quickly to widen the fracture between the two parties. And the deal he engineered will go down as one of the most cunning and brilliant moves ever witnessed in the world of football. Perez's offer to Figo was as follows. If Perez won the election, Figo would move to Real Madrid. If he refused to join, he would have to pay Perez approximately £19 million in compensation. The deal also included an upfront payment to Figo of £1.7 million. If Perez lost the election, Figo would keep the money, and no one would be any the wiser. What happened next has been the subject of much controversy. Some accounts say Figo signed the contract willingly. Others claim his agent did it without his knowledge. Regardless, the contract was signed, and Perez deposited the £44 million required to trigger Figo's release clause with the Spanish Football Federation. The story leaked, and Figo was caught in an impossible situation. When the rumors began to circulate, Figo had no choice but to deny them. If he acknowledged they were true and Perez lost the election, he would remain a Barcelona player, but one who had done a deal with the devil, something the Barcelona faithful would not forgive. The fact that Perez was not expected to win the election meant that he could deny the story, make a considerable sum of money, and continue to play for Barcelona without ever having to confirm his brief affair with their arch-rivals. But Perez did win, and the jewel in Barcelona's crown was faced with the reality of his commitment, and so were Barcelona. The Catalan club were in the process of holding their own elections, with 4 candidates vying for the hot seat at the Camp Nou. The front-runner was Joan Gaspar, a successful businessman and lifelong Barca fan. He would ultimately emerge successful and was handed the most poisoned of chalices on his first day in office. According to Gaspar, Figo approached him begging him to undo the deal he was locked into with Perez, but to do so would make Barcelona a laughingstock. Essentially, they would have to pay tens of millions of pounds to their arch-rivals just to keep a player that was already theirs. Gaspar had to accept the lesser of two evils, and both parties were forced to play the cards they had been dealt. Perez had successfully locked Figo into the deal, but the other parties he needed to convince were the 83,000 Real Madrid members who would cast their votes in the election. And it is here that the final part of Perez's master plan fell into place. Perez promised that if Figo didn't join, he would pay the cost of their membership fees for an entire season, which would come to approximately £19 million. The pledge was intoxicating. On the one hand, signing Figo would fulfill the superpower fantasies of the Madrileños, confirming their status as the bigger club by taking their arch-rival's best player. And on the other, if he did not fulfill his promise, they would get to watch their beloved club for free for an entire season. And with that, Florentino Perez's ascent to the pinnacle of world football was assured. His promise of a glorious future trumped Sanz's memories of a glorious past. Luis Figo had been placed in an impossible position, and Barcelona were utterly powerless to stop any of this happening. Normally, when a player is revealed at the Bernabeu, the sense of pride and accomplishment is etched across their faces for the world to see. Signing for Real Madrid represents the pinnacle of a player's career, confirmation that they are considered among the crème de la crème of the game's stars. But it is difficult to look at this footage and claim that Luis Figo looks overjoyed at having joined Los Blancos. His expression is tense, his smile strained, and his eyes betray a nervousness that seems at odds with the triumphant atmosphere around him. As cameras flashed and journalists shouted questions, Figo appeared pensive, as if the weight of his decision was bearing down on him in those very moments. They say that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but Figo had quickly learned that even the most intense of romantic betrayals pale in comparison to the wrath that erupted from the Barcelona faithful when he upped sticks and left for the Spanish capital. Perhaps his anxious demeanor was in part down to the fact he could hear the bile being spewed about him more than 600 kilometers away in Catalonia. To say the Barcelona fans were incredulous would be an understatement. The newspapers which once showered Luis Figo with praise were filled with hate and condemnation. The headlines screamed betrayal, castigating their former idol and damning him with the title of the worst traitor in the history of football, the true Judas of the beautiful game. In the tribal world of football, being labeled a Judas is the ultimate condemnation a player can face. This term, steeped in historical and cultural connotations of betrayal, is reserved for those who commit the gravest sin in the eyes of their fans, abandoning their club for its fiercest rival. The moment a player earns this label, their legacy is irrevocably tainted. The contributions they once made, the victories they helped secure, and the memories they created are all overshadowed by the stigma of treachery. The narrative of their career is rewritten, no longer celebrated for their talent or dedication, but remembered primarily for their betrayal. The narrative in the media was relentless, with many Barcelona players at the time later revealing that they were surprised at just how vociferous the uproar had been. It seemed they too had learned that hell hath no fury like a Barca fan scorned. Perhaps this is why Figo looked less than thrilled to be standing next to the beaming Florentino Perez. His legacy, his hard work, the biggest achievements of his career had all been washed away with a single signature. Perhaps the reason the world's most expensive player looked so uncomfortable was the thought of having to return to the Camp Nou, a place where he had once been adored, a place he had once called home, a place where there was nowhere to hide. Not long after his move, the fixture list for the coming season was released, and fans around the world marked the date of October the 21st in their calendars, for this was the day that the traitor would face the judgment of those he'd betrayed. The Camp Nou is one of the most intimidating stadiums in the world, a citadel of passion, history, and unyielding fervor. Many great players have faltered on its expansive field, succumbing to the pressure cooker atmosphere created by nearly 100,000 of the game's most passionate fans. It can be a hostile place for both Barcelona players and opposition players, and it can be especially hostile to players who are hated and despised. But hostility does not begin to cover the reception given to the one hated and despised above all others. In the build-up to the game, Figo was in fine form, netting on his Real Madrid debut and registering 5 assists in 5 games. But none of this mattered. Nobody cared, because Figo's return to Barcelona would not be a test of his touch, skill and vision. It would be a test of resilience and character under the most intense scrutiny. Ahead of the match, Figo claimed he was preparing for it like he would any other. Sadly for him, the same was not true for the Barcelona fans. As Judgment Day drew nearer, the poison that filled the airwaves and column inches grew stronger. The anger was palpable, the sense of anticipation all-consuming. And when the clock struck 8 on the 21st of October, the Barcelona fans did not disappoint. For 90 tortuous minutes, Luis Figo was subjected to a barrage of abuse the likes of which had never been seen before. The Barcelona faithful, who had once idolized him, now turned their worship into vitriol, unleashing a torrent of hatred that was unprecedented in the annals of the game. His every touch of the ball was met with a surge of venomous jeers, boos and whistles, with the vitriol aimed not just at him, but also at his family, his mother, his wife and his children, none of whom were spared the fans' fury. The level of hate and disgust was palpable. Banners sprawled with venomous slogans billowed in the gale-force wind of abuse which whistled around the stadium. Fake banknotes bearing his face littered the Camp Nou pitch, and anything which could serve as a projectile was hurled in his direction when he dared stray too close to the stands. The fact that Barcelona won the game 2-0 has largely been forgotten, with the defining image of the match being the hate-filled faces of the Barcelona fans and the forlorn look on the face of their former idol. For Figo, these 90 minutes must have felt like an eternity. Every second on the pitch was a reminder of the fans' sense of betrayal and their need to punish him for his treachery. It was a night that transcended sport, a visceral display of human emotion where the line between love and hate was brutally and publicly blurred. But if Figo believed that the passage of time would heal the wounds created by his departure, he was to be bitterly disappointed when he returned to the Camp Nou for a second time. The importance of photography in the world of football lies in its power to make fleeting moments permanent and to tell stories that words alone often cannot fully capture. While television has revolutionized the way we consume sport, beaming it to all four corners of the globe, there is something uniquely powerful about photography's ability to freeze time during moments of high tension and emotion. While the television footage showed that the animosity towards Figo was still raw and visceral more than 2 years after his move, it was a single photograph, a moment frozen in time that immortalized the entire story and endures as the defining image of the saga more than 2 decades later. The grotesque sight of the severed pig's head on the pristine pitch is a stark and unequivocal statement of contempt, one that encapsulates the fans' feelings of outrage and betrayal with brutal clarity. Unlike television footage, which can sometimes dilute the impact through movement and noise, the photograph forces us to confront the moment in its starkest terms, making the message of hatred impossible to ignore. Luis Figo's subsequent returns to the Camp Nou gradually became less hostile. The once deafening jeers were tempered, and the objects hurled from the stands diminished, not because the deep-seated feelings of betrayal had vanished entirely, but because time and circumstances had shifted the passions of Barcelona's fervent supporters. The rise of a new flamboyant star, a young Brazilian by the name of Ronaldinho, captivated the hearts of the Barcelona faithful, shifting their focus from past grievances to present triumphs. Ronaldinho, with his dazzling skills, infectious smile and joyful approach to the game, quickly became the embodiment of Barcelona's resurgence, allowing the fans to love once again. And they would ultimately love Ronaldinho more than they ever loved the man who broke their hearts. In essence, the Luis Figo transfer saga encapsulates the complexities and contradictions inherent in the world of football. It is a world where the professional aspirations of players collide with the emotional investments of fans, creating a rich tapestry of passion and drama. The same passion that makes football so enthralling also makes it a cauldron of intense emotions where rationality often takes a back seat. In any other industry, leaving one employer to join another, offering a higher salary, is seen as a pragmatic decision. However, football is not just any industry. It operates on a complex web of emotions where love, loyalty, and hatred play pivotal roles. Fans invest their hearts into their clubs, creating unwritten rules that they expect players to follow. The notion of a beloved player transferring to a fierce rival is and always will be seen as the ultimate act of betrayal. The saga also showed the world the behind-the-scenes skullduggery that underpins the business side of the beautiful game. The deal was orchestrated with a level of cunning and subterfuge that would seem more at home in a political thriller than in the world of sports. It revealed how football, for all its passion and pageantry, is also a multi-billion-pound industry filled with spivs and charlatans, where loyalty to club and fan sentiment are secondary to the pursuit of wealth and power. Ultimately, Figo's move to Real Madrid was a stark reminder of the business realities underpinning the sport. While fans cherish the purity of the game, the truth is that football operates within a framework of financial imperatives and power plays. The saga showed how the ambitions of club presidents, the greed of agents, and the influence of various other players can conspire to create seismic shifts in the footballing landscape. It was a narrative rich in drama and intrigue, exposing the complex interplay of loyalty, betrayal, and self-interest that defines the modern game. Figo has steadfastly maintained that he has never regretted the decision. For him, the transfer was a necessary step in his pursuit of personal ambition and professional success, a choice driven by the desire to challenge himself at the highest level. His tenure at Real Madrid was marked by a raft of individual and collective honors, validating his decision to cross the divide. In this complex narrative, Figo's lack of regret and the enduring bitterness of Barcelona fans encapsulate the inherent tensions in football. It is a sport where ambition and loyalty often come into conflict, where personal decisions can reverberate through entire communities, leaving indelible marks. The saga of Luis Figo is a testament to the fact that in football, as in life, choices come with consequences, and not all wounds can be healed, nor all actions forgiven.